what is your take on Elon Musk? How do you feel about him? He's been getting very political,
Yeah.
and there's been a lot of European leaders that are upset. There's talks of banning Twitter and saying stop interfering in our elections and our politics. What's your take on all that?
Well, I have very mixed feelings about him. I guess, overall, I I like him more than I dislike him. He seems like he's a real person. Let's put it that way. Kind of like Trump is. Even when some of the stuff he says is nutty or wrong, and but he doesn't. He's not afraid to say it. He's not afraid to go against the establishment. I guess you got that kind of money. You would think that would be typical of a multi-billionaire, but most of these multi-billionaires are actually amazingly kind of sycophantic towards the establishment. They don't seem to have an original idea in their heads. But he does. He has all kinds of ideas, and some of them are great, and some of them aren't. But he speaks them. So I kind of just admire him for being a loose cannon, and not being afraid to speak his mind. And I think, most of the time he's right. Clearly, like, for example, I strongly disagree with him on Israel. He's been very much a pro-Zionist. Um, um, and Twitter really has changed, I think, for the better, now X, since he took over, that it is freer. It's imperfect. There are still people being banned who shouldn't be banned. And I think, for example, like pro-Palestinian groups have had some trouble under him. But all in all, it's a freer place. He is serious about free speech. He's not, you can point to some hypocrisies. Yeah, it's there, and he deserves a criticism. But all in all, I think he has been a free speech advocate, and one who's, put his money where his mouth is. Now, about his criticisms of European governments, well, and the anger, he said, he's got a right to express his opinion. You got a right to ignore him or respond. I don't see how that's really interference. He can say whatever he wants. If you want to find interference, well, like if he's using X, to try to manipulate elections or whatever, but nobody's actually come forward with those kind of charges. So this interference charge seems to me bogus, and it's also clearly inconsistent too. Because it's because he's on the wrong side of the establishment on these issues that they're mad at him. If he was supporting the establishment and its programs the way that Soros, another multi-billionaire, has, who really has tried to involve himself in elections. Like he certainly has in the United States, where, he'll fund, give lots of money to, for example, local DA elections. And he's been able to change laws in major cities because of that. Clearly, he's trying to affect the outcome of elections, and it's more than speech. In fact, he doesn't get out there and say much of anything. He's strategically, allocating money to different campaigns, to different candidates. And he's also built up these organizations, what we've talked about, color revolutions, for example, in Eastern Europe. Soros is almost always involved in these color revolutions. He trains people, he teaches them how to protest, and, what kind of signs to hold up, and he pays them. That clearly is interference, but I don't see anybody, none of these European leaders complaining about that. It's just because they're all on the same side. Now you have, a multi-billionaire that's criticizing you, and to my knowledge, he's not doing anything like Soros is doing. He's not actually, really trying to involve himself in elections in these countries. He's just expressing his opinions. So, I say, tough luck. He's a rich guy with a big platform and a big, a megaphone, and you're just going to have to put up with him.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, with Soros, it's feels more insidious because it's kind of covert,
Yeah.
hidden. It's not out there. Like you said, Elon is expressing his opinions. He has a huge megaphone, but he had that mouthpiece because of what he's achieved with his companies.
Right.
He was the
Yeah.
one of the top 5 Twitter users before he acquired Twitter. So he already had that following. It's not like he acquired
Right. He
Twitter
didn't
and
have
that's
to
why.
acquire Twitter to have that megaphone. You're right.
Right. Yeah, I think there's just something, I mean, just with billionaires, it's hard for people to. It seems like they're not supposed to get involved. That but at the same time, if you think about it
Yeah, but they
rationally,
are involved. That's the thing. It's again
again,
the number
covertly,
one, yeah, the number one
donors and
donors on both sides of the aisle are these multi-billionaires. We know the Adelsons, what is it, Saban over on the Democratic side, and they're Zionists too. It explains a lot of our politics.
right, right. I mean, it actually, I guess if you look at it, the value, the net worth value, when you see people like Elon Musk, hundreds of billions of dollars,
Yeah.
that's tied to their stock value, which in a way is really the trust that society has put into this person, into this company. So in a sense, it is kind of democratic if you look at it that way. But yeah, it's just kind of interesting seeing somebody, because like you said, most of the time billionaires aren't openly expressing their opinions, but they're actually funding lobbyist groups or creating institutions. They're not out there actually, saying their opinions, but they're got their fingers in a bunch of little pots and doing things. Yeah, I kind of wondering if, when I think about Elon and what's happening here, is if he's just an important cog in this battle against the deep state, and if we should really be viewing the world, the right framework to be viewing the world is that we're in a battle against the deep state, the Western establishment of authoritarianism. Is that how we should kind of be framing things? How do you view the world in that sense?
Well, I think clearly there is. I would say maybe the monumental battle of this time is one between the Western hegemonists on one side, and then the advocates of a multipolar world on the other side. That's and these different local wars. Clearly the Russia-Ukraine war, fits into that. It's the globalists support Ukraine, and the multipolar advocates increasingly support Russia. Yeah, I don't know if you can. There are always local issues, but it's a lot. Certainly when it comes to foreign policy, that seems to be the great rift. That's just the big issue of the time. Now, these globalists tend to have, similar domestic policies too, right? So you find that, so it does extend to domestic policies to a great extent. I mean, it's not just, you can't completely divorce it from the foreign policy. They tend to have a kind of a unified view, the Western hegemonists. So they're, of course, they're in favor of Western hegemony, but they're also in favor of, let's say, woke policies too. I mean, that seems to be kind of de rigueur with among the globalists. I really can't think of an exception.
Would you
And
classify?
they also tend to be also in favor of like very lax immigration controls, to give you an example. So these are all things that are very important to them. And so you find it. Just take one example in France. It's just that we have the National Rally. That's Marine Le Pen's group, her party. They're for ending this. First, establishing good relations with Russia and in general with other non-Western powers, opening themselves up to the multipolar world. But then also, they're in favor of immigration restrictions, and they're attacked. They're considered fascists for some reason, for both of those things. And I think you'll say very much the same thing with the AfD and Sarah Wagenknecht's party, even though that's on the left. It's also true of her party as well. So that seems to be kind of where the lines are drawn. It's sort of like, again, there are all kinds of different local flavors. That's the thing about multipolarity, right? Yeah, you go to India, it's a Hindu civilization. China's a Confucian civilization. Russia is a an Orthodox Christian civilization, and so on and so forth. And then, there are, within Western Europe, there are, the different countries have their own values and their sense of what's important, what their own identities. So there is a great deal of diversity on the multipolar side, just by necessity. They're multipolar, right? But they're all fighting this one kind of this unified vision that the globalists have, the Western hegemonists have, which is it's not just foreign policy, but it's also certain kinds of domestic policies.
Would you classify Trump and Elon in this fight between the Western hegemonists and the multipolar world? What camp would you put them in?
Uh, yeah, well, yeah, it's a little bit tough. I don't think it's Trump is not a true, again, like we say, a neocon. I don't think he's really interested in the ideology. But he does love American power, and so I think he doesn't want to see America losing any wars. At the same time, of course, he doesn't really seem to be eager to start them. Um, yeah, like if Trump had his druthers, he probably would invade Greenland, reacquire the Panama Canal and all that. He likes it. Clearly, I think, that's his vision of himself, is just expanding American power, where he can. But he's not interested in the ideological crusade. He's actually not interested in Western hegemony per se. The thing is that he's the president of the United States, and the U.S. government is like one great machine that's committed to Western hegemony, to this vision. So, we'll just see. Will Trump be able to kind of break free and then pursue his own vision? I don't think so. It's just based on all kinds of past presidencies, not just his own first term. But I think his natural instincts place him somewhere else. He actually would probably be comfortable in a way with a multipolar world, and he say, North America is our pole. This is
Right.
our sphere of influence.
Right. I was kind of thinking Panama,
right,
Canada, Greenland. This is all the idea of our sphere of influence, the Monroe Doctrine. So
right,
it's crude. I don't necessarily agree with it, but
right.
it's a bit more rational, I guess, than.
And it's
but
actually more limited. I mean, it's just like I think it was Alexander Mercouris pointed this out, I think it was a very nice turn of phrase. It's just say for Donald Trump, the sphere of influence is North America, but for the Western hegemonists, the sphere of influence is the entire globe. And so, that's in the end, okay, yeah, I wouldn't be in favor of invading Panama and taking the canal. I think that would be wrong. It would, I don't think it almost certainly is not going to happen. But in fact, even if he did that, he pursued that kind of a crude, militaristic policy within North America. It would be less damaging to the world, much less damaging to the world than what the globalists are doing. Again, it's just that they're going all the way around the world, to places like Taiwan and Ukraine, and fomenting wars with other great powers. And, we've seen the consequences. They're really quite horrific. Now, of course, one blind spot that a lot of these people like Elon Musk and Trump have is Israel. So there's that, they unfortunately, they just refuse to actually differentiate Israeli interests from U.S. interests. I mean, if he was a true MAGA, you would put America first, and America's interests often are not Israeli interests, and they collide. And so this is one place where they have not been consistent, and where they actually do support expansionism on the other side of the globe.
Is there ever an instance where Israeli interests are American interests?
At the present time, not really. I think, Mearsheimer's right that Israel is a huge liability to the U.S. I think it had some value, like back during the Cold War days. It's just a counterweight to Soviet influence in the Middle East. But, those days are long gone.
So do you think there's a possibility that Trump, maybe in his talks with Putin, is able to recognize the movement to the multipolar world and agree to it? And even if Trump is talking about, Greenland and Panama, Canada, it's like Russia would be like, that's your sphere of the world. You guys back out of Europe because Europe is becoming this, it's between the United States and Russia and China, these two powers. It is
Yeah.
the buffer zone. It's dangerous how much influence the United States has in our encroachment towards this other huge sphere of power. We need some distance. That's what
Right,
Mearsheimer
right.
says. You
Yeah.
know,
Well, you're saying again, it's just like, and that's what, of course, the Russians were asking for. They had no desire to invade Ukraine. Um, Again, Putin made that clear. Even after the SMO began, he was immediately proposing neutrality and offering to remove his troops from, the territory that they had just invaded. Yeah, because if neutral countries are buffer zones, and there was a time when our own government recognized that. For example, I know that Eisenhower was all in favor of neutral countries between the East and the West, between the Soviet Union and Western Europe. He saw that reduced the chance of conflict, and it was good for both sides. We've just lost that. We've become that wisdom. We've lost that wisdom, and we've we're now global hegemonists and Western supremacists, basically, that just cannot abide by any sort of rival power, cannot abide the existence of any rival power.
yeah, I mean, that's the scariest thing for me is this idea that we have to have primacy. And you hear that language, Mitch McConnell was saying that,
Mm-hmm.
we need to ensure American primacy in the world. And we have over 800 military bases around the world. It's like, can you retract that, or does it have to come down to some type of showdown where we have, the challenger is going to come up, which is Russia and China, and in my opinion, these in Iran, these powers combined definitely can defeat the American empire, whatever we throw at it, and it would be catastrophic for the world if it happens. But it's just like we are the old lion, with our pride, and there's young upstarts. Our time is done. The the age of primacy is over. But we're not even saying that there's going to be a new head of this pride. We're saying that
Right.
it's going to be a multipolar one. You have your own area, we have our own area, and if we fail to recognize that and allow that to happen, then kind of what you're telling me is that we're headed for some type of inevitable clash, or maybe just some type of collapse instead of a clash, that it just kind of breaks apart like the Soviet Union did. We never had a clash with the Soviet Union; it just broke apart. Could we see the same thing happen with the Western hegemonists? The American empire just collapsed like the Soviet Union did without having to start a massive global war.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there are all kinds of possibilities. I'm not going to, I don't have a crystal ball. I mean, it's clear, there are certain trends that are obvious and will continue into the future. And I think one is one trend is the rise of the multipolar world. Every year that world becomes larger and stronger. And I think that that's just the inevitable trend. And the rest of the world sees it and is starting to shift their allegiance towards that new world. And then on the other hand is Western hegemony. It's on its way out. It's in decline, relative decline anyway. And But how that's going to play out, I just don't pretend to know. I don't have a crystal ball. Will it, end in a conflagration? I mean, it's possible. We've seen it just sort of been a lashing out and a refusal to accept, this decline gracefully. They could, again, as we've said many times, the leaders of the West could just accept this multipolar world and actually do very well in it. They become part of it and become like one of the most important pillars within this new edifice, and it would be and prosper because of it. It would especially be good for Europe, because at the present time, Europe has made itself just entirely dependent on the United States. It's rejected the multipolar vision. It's embraced the hegemonic vision, and as a result, it really has, it's it's made itself just utterly dependent again on the U.S. By cutting itself off from Russia and China and from these other powers, it's lost any kind of bargaining position or any options that it might have. It's just it simply has to accept American dictates. And so we've seen the consequences. We're witnessing the deindustrialization of Europe. It's been very, very detrimental to Europe. It's actually kind of painful to watch. Again, there are a few parties that are waking up and are ringing the alarm bells about it within Europe, but they still don't have power. Um, yeah, the thing is, like within the U.S., you still have maybe somewhat analogous to what you have in Israel. You have these. I think the problem is, much more pronounced in Israel. The peoples that are Zionism is such a powerful force, and it's just sort of a question of how extreme a Zionist you are. But in the U.S., it's kind of accepted that we're supposed to be number one. Like every politician that runs for office always has to repeat those things. Like, we're the greatest country in the world. Yeah, and we will remain so, or we're, um, and nobody's saying that, maybe we should actually kind of accept this new world. Things have changed since the end of World War II. That was really a very unusual set of circumstances. Much of the world have been laid to waste by the wars. Um, but here, on the North American continent, we were unscathed, and so we just had this huge advantage, an economic and political advantage over most of the world for that time. But that was what 80 years ago, and the world has changed. There's just no longer the same kind of imbalance of power. And the balance, and it's nothing like the 1990s again. That was kind of another unipolar moment, right? That's what called it back then. Um, but that was 30 years ago, and the world has changed a lot since then. Um, it, and we need to accept it. But we have people. It just seems like this belief in American supremacy, American exceptionalism is kind of like a religion, a political religion in this country, and just as it makes compromise almost impossible with Zionism, the devotion to Zionism makes compromise impossible within Israel. This devotion to American exceptionalism makes it hard for us to compromise and to deal with reality, and to maybe gracefully retire from our position of primacy. And again, it would be very good to we could be remain a great power for centuries if we wanted to, and be prosper. But we the thing is that we're in the grips of this vision, of us as the essentially, the ruler of the world, that we have our sphere of influence, and it is the globe, and we're just not able to accept anything else. That is clearly just unsustainable. And we are trying to maintain it, and it's doing, at great cost. Again, it's damaged the reputation of the dollar, which is, one of the main fundamental pillars on which our power stands, and it's clearly damaged that. But then it's also, put us in conflict with, one of the great powers, that's Russia, and it can potentially put us in conflict with China, with Iran, and if we continue down this path, we're going to find ourselves on the losing side, I think, of a world war. We could go that way.